Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us in studio today, it's his turn, end of summer, in the heat. It was a little warm out there today. Tony Cabral is with us. Thanks for coming in again, as always.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting me again.
Lots going on. The session has ended formally. I know the informal session can take place right now, but obviously the budget is passed and things are good, but New Bedford did very well with the ultimately when the budget was all said and done. You must have been pretty pleased.
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased. I think New Bedford did very well. We worked very hard to make sure that New Bedford was going to be on the winning column, right?
Yeah.
And I think New Bedford is on a winning column, around a number of areas. But
you talked education, right? I mean, the last time you were here, you were really excited about the education funding that the city was going to get. It was going to make a difference. That's what you were saying. This
school year that starts now in September.
Yeah.
Well, September, I guess.
Yeah.
The city is going to receive $25 million more than the last school year. I mean, that's significant.
And that's not ARPA either. That's
not ARPA.
Right.
That's just the Chapter 70 funding, which is the state aid to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the formula changed because of the Student Opportunity Act
that you passed a couple of years ago, and you were waiting to get that.
So now it's being fully implemented. We have another 5 years left of the additional funding. Then at some point we'll stabilize, and then will be more the traditional increases. But cities like New Bedford, Fall River, and other cities we call gateway cities, they benefited the most out of the change in the formula and the additional commitment to put additional money to these schools. It's about 26 cities overall that really saw a huge benefit. I mean, Springfield is even more than we did because their numbers before the reform, the Student Opportunity Act, they are practically almost 100% of their school budget is state funded at this point. New Bedford is in the 80s. 80 some odd percent. But when you look at dollars and cents, $25 million in one school year, more than what you got the previous school year, I mean, that's significant. My hope is that the superintendent and the school committee obviously will plan this very carefully. I would like to see a bigger impact in the classrooms.
So there's no restrictions that the legislature put on this either. I mean, the money goes into the budget, and they can use the money how they deem necessary.
Right. I mean, There's no specific restrictions.
Unlike the ARPA money, which there are restrictions for. Right.
Or yes. So they have a lot of room and a lot of flexibility how they apply the additional funding to the school year. I'm hoping that it goes towards the classroom, goes towards learning, and also some of the wraparound services that some families need in order for their kids to really do well in the school. In addition, the free breakfast and free lunch, we put in over $100 million to continue that program. Because we didn't know what the federal government was going to do.
Yeah, the federal government was going to cancel it.
It was going to cancel it, so it's safe until whatever the federal government is going to do afterwards or not.
How important was that, do you think? How important is that?
Well, I think that's very important. Yeah. When a kid gets to school and he or she has not had a meal, has not had a breakfast, right? Or their only hot meal is in school during lunchtime, right?
Right.
That's very important. I mean, how can you learn? How can you focus if you are hungry, for example?
And it seemed to level the playing field when that started and what you're continuing, because now I know that there was, I don't want to say some shaming, but before there was the free reduced lunch, but some kids would, I don't want to say get picked on, but they were, slighted out. But now everybody gets it.
Everybody gets it. Whoever wants to do it. Some kids still take their own lunch because they don't like some of the lunches.
Well, yeah.
But everybody gets it. Everybody has an opportunity for breakfast. Before the bell, I'm hoping that some school systems also implement after the bell. It's been in some school systems, there's been some pushback a little bit after the bell breakfast. But I think it can be done both ways to make sure that every kid, when they walk into that building, they're going to have at least that breakfast to be small or
yeah, it's like a
breakfast
fruit, yogurt.
it's like fruit, yogurt, some
maybe
cereal,
a little bowl of cereal there. That they get.
cereal. No, it's the traditional
Right.
grab and take
Right. Yep.
sort of approach. It's not scrambled eggs. It's
Yeah, but it's still it's what they need. In the
that's what
morning
they
to
need.
go.
I mean, it's a balanced breakfast. You know, in terms of nutrition,
Yeah.
it's a balanced lunch in terms of nutrition as well.
It's a $100 million commitment by the
So
state.
we put in $100 million commitment to make sure the program continued, because we still don't know quite sure what the federal government is going to do on these lunches.
Yeah.
There was a possibility of ending the full, going back to the old system.
Right.
We felt that the best way was for the state to step in. We do have some surplus money. Gave us that ability to do, and until the federal government sort of irons out what the program is going to look like in the future.
Right. There were a lot of programs locally here that I know that you were advocating for. Talk a little bit about those that you were most pleased with that were ultimately included in the budget. You don't get everything you want, because that's the way it works.
No, you don't get everything you want, but I think you have to target the ones that will have the biggest impact locally, right? And I've worked over the years with a number of local organizations, from Denison Memorial to New Bedford Festival Theater to New Bedford Historical Society, which is the Frederick Douglass House, and the Future Park, that we're going to have, Abolition Park. Just to mention a few of the organizations that over the years we've been really working with them closely to make sure they get some support to do their mission, not to mention the Zeitarian, for example, and others.
Which gets criticized by some, that the legislature or taxpayers fund the Z.
Well, it's not completely funding the Z. It's simply coming in and providing that a certain amount of money for the operating
Expenses.
of the Z, in order for them then to be able to go out and seek additional funds, and that they can use that as a matching
Right.
For other private funds.
In the same token, it's also an economic engine. It brings people into the city.
So it's an economic engine. It provides tremendous services to the kids also in this community. And they have a fantastic program with the public schools and also with the charter schools.
Right.
That a lot of the students, a lot of the young kids in the public schools and charter schools go through the Z. And they get that experience of being able to go to the Z and either be a movie or a play or a program designed for them specifically. So I think it's a great institution that really participates not only in the economic level of bringing in when they have the regular shows, but also making sure that the kids in our community get that same experience.
We're talking to State Representative Tony Cabral here on this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm curious, as you look at the budget right now, I mean, you mentioned briefly the surplus there. And I know there's discussion. There was talk about tax relief. There was talk about economic program. What are your thoughts just on the surplus itself, and where does it go? Does it go back in the rainy day fund, which some people say you do use that too?
Yes. It's a combination of how the money gets appropriated. Obviously, the rainy day fund right now is at the highest level it's ever been. The projection is after the end of this fiscal year, if the revenues continue to come in at this pace, the rainy day fund could be potentially over $8 billion. It's never been not even close to that amount, and that's important in case the economy tanks a little bit. We'll be ready for that situation if we have to face it.
And I don't know if people realize that either. It's not. It's yes, it's there, but if it's not spent, which is the point, because when times do go down, it'll be there so that your services won't be affected down the road because you've saved up that money.
Right. It's like a savings account.
Right.
In case you need to, in case there is a rainy day that you need to tap. It's almost like. For us as individuals and as families, the experts usually say you should have set aside 3 to 6 months of your salary, for example. Right? Some families are able to do that, others are not, unfortunately. So this is sort of that same concept. The state has a rainy day fund, puts the money aside, It's in a savings account, if you will, and then when we need to tap it, we tap it. On the last couple of fiscal years, we didn't have to.
Right.
So that's why the growth has been the way
Higher
it
than
is.
normal, yeah, higher than it has been.
But much higher. Plus, we made additional changes of what goes into the rainy day fund, in particular around capital gains. Capital gains is always an up and down
Yep.
revenue stream. Some years, depending how the market did, how people invested their savings, it can be a really significant amount of revenue for the state. We have applied that a percentage of that goes automatically to the rainy day fund. This way, stabilizes the amount that we expect in order to apply it to the fiscal year, to the budget that we work on. So we have more. We can predict easier the amount that more or less will be for the general fund.
Right. Yep.
And that's good. That's good also for planning, and it's good to put aside a certain percentage of that kind of revenue, so in case we need it. But the surplus has to do with the economy. The economy is hot in many areas of the economy. A lot of employers can't even find employees to work.
Well, going back to the schools, I know schools are still looking for teachers and paraprofessionals and what have you.
That's right.
They're begging for people to take the jobs.
If you go to the hospital, the South Coast Health, they're looking always for also qualified folks in order to provide nursing homes, desperately in need of additional workers. I know there are some nursing homes in the city that can't make all their beds available because they don't have the staff in order to staff the rest of those beds in those nursing homes. So that puts a strain in the whole system, including in the hospitals as well. If there's a backup, where the backup is going to be, it's going to be actually at the hospital, right?
Right. Yep.
In case the person needs to go to rehab or some kind of hospice service, that would be more appropriate at a nursing home level. Hopefully we'll come out of this cycle with more folks with the skills that we need for the economy to grow.
Do you think that ultimately there'll be a decision on the surplus? I know the Senate has its plan. I know the House Speaker has sort of his plan that they want to do. Ultimately, they've got to make a compromise, I would figure, at some point in time.
Well, one of the disappointments is really not getting to a compromise on the so-called economic development bill.
Correct.
Big piece of...
and it looked like it was going to pass.
It passed the House, it passed the Senate, and in the end, it got stuck because of that 1986 law that might trigger an automatic refund to all taxpayers, all those who file income taxes in Massachusetts. That put a halt really to the negotiations. But there are a lot of pieces of that piece of legislation, and including the rebates that we had crafted in the House, which was similar to the Senate, which would be a minimum of $250 per taxpayer, individual taxpayer, $500 per family.
Right.
That in itself was going to, between that and the money that we invested in unemployment insurance to shore up that fund.
Which was that was a big issue right there, yeah.
Big issue because it's still in the red.
Yep.
And we need to fix it, or else the total burden will go on employers. So we need to work some of that out.
Was, in the economic plan, that was a huge issue.
So all of that, those pieces would be about $1 billion just for that. And then we had additional spending of ARPA money, which New Bedford was going to get a good chunk of that as well. So that bill is still under negotiations. We don't know if we can resolve those issues during this informal sessions until the end of the year. Partially we could, if it's the cash portion of the bill, because a piece of that bill is also bonds, so the state can issue bonds, and that requires a roll call, and it requires a 2/3 vote, right? 2/3 vote. So
you can still do the 2/3. You don't need if there's one person who.
Oh, we cannot do that. It has to be a roll call.
Okay.
It has to be a roll call. So that portion of the bill most likely would have to take place when we come back in January
Right.
for the new session. But the other piece, which is cash, was about half of the bill, a little bit more than half of the bill. The bill is around, in total, the economic development bill is in total about $4 and some change billion and some change. The rebates and the help for the unemployment insurance and all of that would be about $1 billion. But if the 1986 law triggers, then that could be potentially between $2 and $3 billion in additional
Right, so the money gets all out of whack. Yeah.
So it gets all out of whack. I think it's we have to wait for that to be certified. The auditor, in this case Suzanne Bump, is still the auditor, and she has to certify if the law will trigger or not. That has to be done in September as well.
Got a few minutes left. I'm curious. Obviously, you know because you do the commute, but I mean with the MBTA and the Orange Line being shut down for a month, and I know the Green Line has a good shutdown for a month too. What's your thought, I guess? I know, and let me preface by saying, I know that New Bedford has to come up for a vote if they would like to be a member of the MBTA community for commuter rail to start, which is supposed to start. You've worked on it for 30 years, and it's coming up.
It's coming.
What is your
It's coming
level?
At the end of 2023. It's
right.
coming. It's on schedule right now, and it's on budget too.
What's your level of concern, I guess, when you look at the MBTA?
Well, the MBTA has lots of structural problems to begin with.
Are you? Does it make you worried about our commuter rail service?
In the short term, it does, right? Because they are the ones. They are not only the investors of capital infrastructure for the whole system. They also are the administrators of the system, right? Some of it is through private companies, but it's negotiated through MBTA. My personal view is I think we need to restructure MBTA.
Okay.
I think we need to do two things. And I had proposed this, by the way, many years ago when I filed a piece of legislation to create the funding for new rail expansions, if you recall that. And I think we need to create an authority that does commuter rail or does rail itself, heavy rail, because the T within the Boston area is what's called light rail, right?
Yeah,
the tracks are different.
Yep.
Tracks are different. We can't just put any, we can't.
Right,
go to Bedford.
the trains that would be from New Bedford are different than the trolley cars up in Boston.
Right. So I would think I would like to see at least some conversations along the lines of creating a rail authority for the state and connect also with other states, because we have we have trains that come through and they go to either to Maine or to Vermont and so forth. And to New York. I mean, especially in Western Mass now, there's some services will be from Springfield to Hartford and then on to New York City. Yeah. So I think we should consider, let's put it this way, creating a rail authority that deals with all the rail or commuter rail or otherwise, and then create an authority that's going to run the T itself, the immediate service of the T.
Because the T also includes the buses too, and
right.
what have you.
That's right. And I think Boston, in my opinion, should have a seat at the table. They should be, because they are the major city. They are the economic engine of Massachusetts and New England, right? Boston, the Boston area. Yeah, so the city of Boston has a big stake in how that works, the MBTA. Not so much the train that is going to come to New Bedford or Fall River or any other community. So I think we ought to restructure it, create a separate board, a separate authority that's going to run what's called the commuter, not the commuter, but the metro service, right? Be the buses, be the trolleys, be the orange line, red line, whatever it may be called. And I think Boston ought to have a seat at the table. It's very important for Boston, and Boston not only should have a seat at the table, should also put some money in the game.
Well, yeah, a lot of the money.
That's what happens with the metro systems, around the world. I mean, you go be in Paris, be in London, be in other communities. The city has a major role in that authority that runs that metro system.
Right. So the New York City Metro.
New York City Metro, right?
Yeah.
DC. as well.
Yep.
You know? So I think we need to really rethink and reestablish and reorganize how that's going to work. So I think in the end it will be good for us too when our service begins at the end of 23.
It's going to be huge when the train actually does come here. And I was, like I said, I don't think there hasn't been a lot of talk, but it just it struck me as when I was writing down the notes for this, thinking to myself that it's a big deal. The city's been waiting 30 years for this. You've been involved since day one.
That's right.
And there's a question of confidence of the leadership, it seems, right now.
Yeah, I mean, plus if you are in Boston and you depend on the T, or if you are in Cambridge or Brookline or any other community, then you ought to have a say on that service as well. You got to, not only the state should be overseeing and telling you exactly what's going to happen, I think you should have a seat at the table, especially Boston itself, the city of Boston. And they should put some money in the game because they have ability to raise funds. I know there is this idea that we should do free fares throughout the system. I think that's something that the mayor of Boston is looking at, how she can implement. She's implementing in some of the bus,
some routes,
some routes,
right?
And that's appropriate at this point. I mean, the place until the whole thing gets restructured, and then we can rethink as well around what the fares might be or might not be.
I know you've brought it up in the past. Do you expect the next session to kind of talk about that issue?
I think it's going to be a big issue in the next session.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think, at this point, Governor Baker thought he could fix it. He hasn't been able to fix it. It's been that 8 years. From almost his first year on, he says, I'm going to fix this, because he's so-called technocrat. Because it goes beyond one person, right? The system is so broken.
It's so big, too.
And it's so big
Right.
that, it doesn't make any sense that that authority called MBTA should be the one to handle all rail in the state. Other states don't do it that way, and other countries don't do it that way.
Yeah. We were talking, as you mentioned before, the session's over and you've got a new session starting in January. I can talk to you because you have no opponent. As you look at the election, I don't want to talk about the races per se because I don't want to put you on the spot with that, but I will ask, it's obviously been in the news nationally, not so much locally, but nationally, is when you look about election security and what have you, what are your thoughts as the city goes in, not the city, but, well, the city and the state, as it goes into this election cycle? How do you feel about Massachusetts and New Bedford's election process, how they handle elections?
I feel very confident about that. I mean, we have a great system in place. We just did additional reforms, as you know, for mail-in ballots and for early voting, both in primaries and finals.
And very successful.
Very
New
successful.
Bedford's has done very well.
That's right, very successful, and we had tweaked those a little bit more. I know some folks think that the Secretary of State is going to mail you a ballot. He or she, but in this case, right now, he's going to mail you a form in case you want to do it. You got to request it, then send it in. So you're not going to get a ballot that anybody can use. It's certifiable. You have to return it.
Yeah, we already got it for the primary. We already got that.
That's right. So it's in the local system. I mean, over the years, I mean, you have the poll workers get trained. The poll workers get trained. We have the local police department is responsible also for safety and protecting the ballot boxes, right? That's why when you go and vote, there's always a police officer at each polling place. And when those ballots get transported, in this case, to City Hall, to be counted or to be verified, because the machines will do it right there on the spot, then also a police officer has to accompany election officials with the ballots. So I think it's a system that has worked. Those officers that also work the polls get trained. So we don't need additional enforcement, if you will, like in the past some other folks would like to get involved in the so-called safety of elections. You know.
And you know this too, because obviously you vote, but you run in a bigger place too, as far as just one place. When I vote, the poll workers know me. A lot of them have been there since I started voting, for crying out loud. So they know most of the people that are participating in the election. it's pretty hard for somebody to walk in and say, who are, I don't know you, who are you?
Right. No, I mean, I have the same experience, obviously. When I go to my polling place, they know me, they know my family, and they sometimes, sometimes my daughter goes with me just so she can see the process. And if she's not
Seamus
there,
has done that with me too.
They'll ask, hey, where's your daughter? How come she's not with you today?
Yeah.
And they ask, how old is she now? There's an interaction. They're really fantastic. They do a wonderful job, and they are very dedicated folks.
Yeah, and they don't do, my mother used to do it in Wareham for years. You don't do it for the money. It's really it's for the event. It really is the event.
It doesn't pay well.
No, it's more of an event really for people to do it.
That's right.
And it's good that, with your daughter or Seamus, you see kids there, it's good for them to see the process take place as well.
It is. So they can, when they are able to vote, they can participate and vote. Because that's important. That's how we're going to keep our democracy healthy, is by people participating and making decisions. Elections do matter, as we are very familiar with that, without going into any details of anybody, but they do matter.
They
do make a difference. Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's going to do it for this edition. My thanks for joining us and coming in. I know it's, especially in June and July, you are straight out. All the legislatures are straight out as the session comes to an end, so it's good to probably breathe. And I know you've been in the district a lot more. You were with Senator Markey the other day, so getting back to the district's a good thing too.
Well, thank you, Jim, for the invitation. It's always nice to come in and talk to you and have an opportunity to communicate with the viewers. And hopefully we provide the information that is useful also for their own decisions,
And if the schedule holds true, it looks like you'll be December or January, one of those, how things work out.
Maybe
so we'll
at the beginning of the next session.
So when I see you in December or January, it'll be, after Christmas, you'll be financially destitute and need to work more to get out of debt. So it's good seeing you.
Thank you very much.
That's going to do it for this edition of Beacon Hill Reports. I'm Jim Marshall. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Have you ever seen somebody treated unfairly because of the color of their skin?
Do you guys know what it means to have white privilege?
What is racism, and what do you think about it?
Do you remember our first group photo? This is it. Smiles all around, even though we were all nervous.
Who could have imagined that our first weekend together would soon turn into a lifetime of memories?
You're an amazing young man. Your brothers and sisters really look up to you. They're a big brother.
It's so cool to watch the adult that you've become, and you really have done as much for us as you think we've done for you.
It took 20 years, and I got my third child, who was 17 at the time.
There's so many rewards in life. You coming into our home was one of the greatest rewards we could have ever had.
I ain't never felt so much love before in my life.